There's no way Google's down.
Not
The
all of
world's not
Google.
on fire.
Nothing's
Gmail.
not on status
Yeah,
pages,
but it's
like,
not-
I cannot get it to work.
It's not all of Google. It's just some of their enterprise
Yeah.
servers.
Like,
Yeah,
the calendar is not found.
yeah, that happens. AWS goes down. So
It's not allowed to go down.
I know it does anyway. All right, let's see. So recording, doing stuff. If I add the Zoom meeting, which maybe I can't because we can get.
How'd you make the text bigger again?
Oh, I looked up. You actually have to do CSS.
You had to do CSS.
So I think you could just put a CSS file.
Tony, what's that shirt you're wearing?
Let's see it.
Can you? I was just fucking around with cameras. Can you
Oh.
see?
Yeah, I was like, what's? Yeah.
Did you know Zoom could do that?
Nope.
Technology
I
is
didn't know that.
amazing.
Yeah.
It's great.
You're Italy.
You see my screen, Tony?
Yep.
Amazing.
All right, so we did it. So we built this little stencil tool, lets us add things and delete things and edit things. Okay, so it does all the little pieces there. So let's just, I want to just look back at the code for a minute, and I just want to walk through it again with you guys, and then we will try to integrate some fetching to our Rails app. So we have our app root to start with. These are just these two files here are just test files. So they're things you can do unit testing with and end-to-end testing with. We'll probably get into that as we move forward through the summer, but right now we're just going to delete those. They're irrelevant. They don't actually mean anything. This is our app root, it's called. Again, this exists inside of our index.html, which is where everything starts from. So we have app root being called here. So what that says is, okay, I'm loading my index.html, which is where we played with all of our stuff when we're doing very basic JavaScript and jQuery. It's going to come through here and it says, hey, there's an app root element there. And because we've loaded the JavaScript already, the JavaScript is already looking for, when the document loads, look for an element called app root. And when you find it, I want you to execute the set of code that we find here. Okay. So we don't see that code that connects the two pieces together, but we know that it's happening, and it's happening because we've used this component decorator and tagged it with app root. Okay. So what the JavaScript compiles down to is, hey, look when the page loads for any element that has app root as its tag name, and then I want you to execute the render function inside of this class. Okay, basically following that. Does that make sense? Okay. So then we get to here, and it says, okay, I'm going to create this new Ion app, and I'm going to create a router, and I'm going to create a route that says if the URL is / then go to app to-do list. So again, what this is doing behind the scenes, there's code written that says when the page loads, if my URL, my relative URL route is /, then what I want to do is add on to my HTML into my body this element, this component. Okay, so this is more or less equivalent if we were on route / to just, I think it ends up doing something that's like, I'll get into why I'm changing this in just a second too. Right. So what's happening with this Ion route, if we're on the / route, is that it's just adding this HTML element into the page. Okay. That's all it's really doing. So then when that exists, we're going to go follow it to go find an element in our project that has a tag of app to-do list. We find that here. If you name your files correctly, it makes it a lot easier to be able to figure this stuff out, right? But we go to app to-do list and it says call my render function, which then sets us off on a list of all kinds of code, which we'll walk back through in a second. I do want to go back for a moment. So when you're in the render function and you're returning things, the default here was to do something like that with open parentheses. This is fine so long as all of your elements are nested inside of a single element. So right here, ion router, ion route, and ion nav are all routed inside of our ion app. Okay, but if I want to put something parallel to, so not nested underneath of, but like a sibling of our ion app, the way that you do that in Stencil is you make this an array, and then it's just an array of HTML elements. And then I can nest things inside of this. Okay, but it's literally an array of HTML elements. It's not something that we're used to seeing, but it's just like numbers or strings or anything else. We are just adding a comma after the first one and saying now we're going to put a second one, or it's just going to put them down on the string. You only have to do that at the highest level of whatever you're returning. So you don't have to, like if you put something that's parallel here, which like ion router and ion nav are siblings of each other, you don't have to put a comma there. It's just at the highest level. Anything that's nested is fine. Okay. Daniel had a question about that yesterday, so I just wanted to bring it up. All right. So then we got to our render function inside of app to-do list. So now we come here and we say, hey, we're going to create a card. Card's going to have some card content. We're going to create a list. Inside of that list, we are going to render items, which we'll go follow that in a second. And then after it, we're going to put another ion item, which is just an add item input box. We're going to put another one that's just a button that says save. Okay. So when we look back at our page, that is this and this. Okay. I'm just creating those two things. If we go back and follow this render items function, we come here. It says I want to return a map. Why do we use maps?
That makes a new array. It puts that. It changes what's in your array and maps it to those values.
Right. So we're going to transform each item in the array to be something else, and we're going to return the array of the changed items. Okay. So we're making it change. So we do this. We do the map. We go item by item. And on each item, we call app to-do list item. So where do I go if I want to follow this further? How do I find what this code is actually executing?
You find that file. You go to the folder, app to-do list item, and you find the
So I'm just following what the name of the thing is, and if I've named my folder in my TSX correctly, I should find that the tag for that element is app to-do list item. Which then where do we go?
You go to the render.
Go to the render function.
Yeah, and then that's what's going to be
Okay.
based on that editing.
Right. So that's going to say if we're editing, then we want to do one thing. If we're not, then we want to do another thing. Okay. We've set, so yesterday when we left, all of this code or a lot of this code was still inside of app to-do list when we were writing it. We just started to break it out and my computer died. But what I did is I moved a lot of the code for each of the items. So now each one of these items, so go to store and the edit button and the trash button, and also when you click edit, that now input and the save button, I moved all of that into its own component. It just gives us a little bit easier control and on a smaller thing. Right? We start to create some complexity, so we have to deal with that somehow. So we put it into its own things, and that's why we have an app to-do list item. The app to-do list item is going to take a property, which is the item. Properties are things that you're passing down from higher level elements. Okay. So in our case, it's the item. So as we're going through the list here, we see item equals item, and that works because there's a property called item, which we're expecting to be a string here. All right. We have also created a couple of other things. So there's this state variable, editing, which is a boolean which we've set to false. So whenever you initialize this component, editing is set to false. And that's useful because when we come down to our render function, if editing is set to false, so we don't fall into this condition, we fall here, we're going to just display the item, right? Just going to put the name of it, and we're going to display a create icon and a trash icon. So this is a non-editing version of it. Now, what we say is when I click on the create button, then I want to toggle. I'm going to toggle things, so I go to toggle. and I'm going to just switch editing from whatever it is to the opposite. So this is just a fast way of changing it from, so this says this.editing equals not this.editing. So if this.editing was true, now it's false. If this.editing was false, now it's true. Just a faster way of doing that. So, right, just to be clear, this is the same as see that. Just this is a lot more code than that's not just. All right. So if we click on the edit button, then we're going to switch editing, and because it has this state decorator defining it, we're going to switch. So now this .editing is true. So we're going to return an input box, ion input, with this value. And we're going to say that when we click on the save, we're going to actually update the information. Okay. Because it's a lot of stuff, but more or less we're following that. So state changes what the actual HTML looks like. Okay. So when we have an element that's on state, that's decorated with state, when we have a variable that's decorated with state, and it changes, that re-renders the render function. Called render again is the easiest way to think about it. What it actually does is it takes the difference between what actually exists in the HTML and what is now going to be rendered based on the render function, and it looks for differences and it swaps out the differences. Okay, so it's a little faster. So we don't see the flicker effect. But so because editing is decorated with state, when we change it by clicking on the toggle button and having it actually toggle, we're going to re-render and it's going to change between one and the other. All right. Events are ways of, so properties are ways of communicating down your nesting, right, from parent element down into a child element. Events are a way of communicating back up. So that's the way that we send information from our child element back up to the parent element. So in this case, we're saying we're going to send two events. One is item deleted, one is item updated. These events are very similar to things you've seen before. So it's like the click event. So if something's clicked on, then you listen for that click and then you do something. In our case, we're going to listen in the higher level element for an item deleted event and an item updated event. So in this case, when we click update, so when we click edit, change something, and then click the save button here, it's going to call the update function. And that's going to say this dot item updated dot emit. So it's going to send the event up. And what we're sending is a hash that has old item, which is the current item, and new item, which is the new item, which was getting changed because we have an on-input event that's changing this new item here. Okay. So as we're typing, we're updating this new item, and then when we click on the save button, we actually send the event up as an update. So what that ends up doing is sending it back up here, and you see we have a listener, so at listen decorator for item updated, which is going to pass in an event. We're going to copy our items. We're going to find the index of the item that is in the array that we made the change to. So we're looking for that old item. Where did that exist? Okay, let's replace that old item with a new item, and then let's set item so we re-render the page. Okay, just follow that. Questions about that? Nope. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to start to break this back down again to much smaller sets. So this is a very high-level overview. It's an introduction to a lot of the different pieces that exist in Stencil. So let's just break it all the way back down to the very simple. So we're just going to, and I'm going to let you guys try to walk me through this so that let's keep that one. Let's get rid of that one. All right. Let's get rid of all this stuff. All right. So let's go back to the very basic. So what's going to happen right now if I reload the page?
You won't see anything.
I won't see anything. Why won't I see anything?
There's nothing on the page other than
Will you see the card? Will you see the CSS? For those
You might see the CSS for a card, but yeah, so that's.
You see the card.
But everybody gets why that's happening, right? So, the only reason why that's happening is because in our app root, we've defined the slash to go to the app to do list. And we come here, we have a tag of app to do list, and that render function just gives us back the set of HTML. Right? So everybody's cool with that? Good. All right. All right. So step 2. Let's talk about. Let's create another element. Let's just do like a list. Okay. So we're just going to create a app dash list. All right. So what do I want to change here?
Tag needs to be app dash list. Class needs to be app list.
And then the file name we probably want to change.
Yeah, app list.tsx. You need to clear out the return array.
Yeah, you don't necessarily have to. We did at least have to get rid of the app list call though, because that would cause infinite looping. But yeah, so let's just return an ion list.
Will that actually infinitely loop? Or
I don't
will it
know.
just
I don't know. I don't think it'll infinitely loop. It'll probably kill itself. It'll probably be like you're referencing a thing that's already referenced, or yeah, that's most likely what's going to happen. That would be my guess. I've never actually done that because it's not. I mean, we could try it. All right, so in here we're calling app list. That means that we're going. And by the way, ion card is the same thing. It's just that ion card is a thing that we're importing as a third-party package. So it's actually looking through and saying, do you have any ion card element somewhere in your third-party packages? If you do, go call its render function. So app list. We go in there and it's ion list and it's returning app list. Not sure why it's complaining about stuff, but it could just not be catching up. All right, so if we run that, let's just see. It might be breaking in the. No. That's interesting. They probably ran across it and were like, oh, just put it. Yeah, that's very interesting. Somebody while developing most likely ran across that and was like, this is annoying. I'm just going to ignore it if that happens. And what they should have done was throw an error, but somehow it got past. And because like, as you mature in your development, you don't do dumb things like that because like, why would you? Right? It becomes obvious that I'm trying to call a thing that's inside of itself, so it's just going to recursively loop. So let's not do that. But so we have a list, right? Let's just create a little ion item, ion label, my first item. Okay. So everybody gets what's happening here, right? Right. So now let's talk about state a little bit. So let's create a state variable. Let's actually start with not a state variable. So let's just create something that's like show list. And we'll make it a boolean. We'll set it equal to true. Okay. How can I use that? How can I? Okay, so let's say that I want to create a way of showing and hiding our list. Right, seems pretty simple. I just want to show and hide it. How might I go about creating a button that will show and hide the list?
Okay, show and hide the list. Alright, so you have to go up, back to app to do list. It's gonna have to be on that level.
I could do that. I could do it here. I don't have to necessarily, but I could.
Okay.
Because the whole list is here, I could.
Oh yeah, that's true. That's the whole list.
I could.
So, yeah, you could do it there.
I could do it here.
So,
What?
like, where do you want?
It's fine. We can start it. We can start here. That's fine.
Yeah, where do you want the button?
I don't care. You tell me. It doesn't matter.
Alright, so since you don't know where, you can just put it above the card. I don't know.
Okay, sure.
So, inside the return, you're gonna have to use the comma separator, but like, yeah, put like button or ion button.
Ion button. Yep.
And then, yeah, close it, comma. And then I don't even know what's going to display, but put something in there. Remove the show list. And then,
So let's just look at that. See what that did. All right. So we have show list. Card got pushed to the bottom. So it's fine.
okay. And then, okay. You need to have like a non-click event on the button.
So what do I write here?
Put a function name, which is this dot.
So you have, so there's an interesting. So you can't just do this dot update here, and the problem is that the reference to this isn't available to you. So you have to create an anonymous function and then call the this dot update inside of it. But so we can do this dot toggle.
Yeah.
So I need a toggle
And then
function.
create that function.
Alright.
And then, okay, do you just want to, in terms of hiding the list, do you just want to just not display it?
I just want to not display it. Yeah.
Alright. So you can, okay, you can create a state variable
Okay. So we can create a state variable. Why would we create a state variable?
because when it's switched, you can call it re-render and you can change your rendering function such that based on what it is, you can literally just not have the list in there. So app state.
So hold on one second. So do you guys get that?
No.
Okay. So state, like there's nothing behind this. I mean, there's lots of stuff happening behind this. What I want you to know and memorize is that when a variable that has a state decorator on it changes somewhere in the code, the render function gets called again.
Okay.
That's what we need to memorize. I don't need you to understand why that happens. It's not important. What you need to know is that when a variable that has a state decorator on it changes, the render function is going to get called again.
Okay.
Everybody get that?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and it like I don't know why that happens exactly. I can guess at what's going on, which is that the JavaScript is saying look for things when they're decorated with state, and if I see a modification happen to that, then call this function that says go look at the render function and make the changes. But I don't know. It's magic. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not magic. We can go follow it. There's nothing particularly special going on there, but you don't need to know how it happens. What you need to know is that when a variable that is decorated with state changes, the render function gets called again. Okay. Does that make sense? All right. So state.
Yeah, close parentheses.
So make sure when you're writing out these things, it's going to try and help you. You want to import state from stencil core, and that happens. So it puts it up here. If it didn't do that for you, like if I had finished writing the state decorator and did this, it's going to yell at me. There's a couple ways that you can deal with that. You can go over it and press that option enter thing that I said before, and it says add import statement, and you just press enter a couple times, and that fixes it. Or you can just come write state up here on your.
So what's the variable we need to re-render when state is changed?
So it's the other way. So when a variable decorated with state, so you can have multiple variables that are decorated with state. When any variable decorated with state changes, the render function gets called again.
Got
So
it.
so I can create a thing that's called like show hide, and I can create another state variable that's called like button display. I can create as many of those as I want. If any one of these variables that are decorated with state changes, the render function will be called again.
Got it.
Which means that it's going to reevaluate the render function, right? So you follow it back through.
Okay.
So let's just create one called show hide though, and we'll set it equal to false initially. Okay. So like when the component loads, show hide is set to false.
So within toggle, you're gonna change.
So within
show
toggle, we want to change it.
This show hide equals.
Just put true. Yeah. For the moment, let's just put true so it's explicit what's going on here.
Okay, and then inside the return function, inside ion card content.
Yep.
You can do the interpolation thing. You can do the. I was gonna do like the ternary operator.
Okay.
So, if this dot show hide.
Let's just, so what I like to do in this scenario, so you can do what you're about to do, I'm just going to create another function.
Okay.
So I'm just going to say this.render list. And then we'll create another function up here that's render list.
And then in there you can do.
And just return. Okay. So we didn't change anything, right? We're just using a function now to put that from here into here. But it's going to make it a little bit easier when we're doing the evaluation of the show hide to see what's going on. Okay. All right. So if I want to hide the list when show hide, well, let's just make this more explicit. Okay. So if I want to hide the list when hide is true, how could I do that?
So if it's true, then just don't return anything, or return.
You see that?
Yeah.
So if this dot hide is true, then just return nothing. Otherwise, return apples. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just start here. So if I reload this page, I can see my list. If I click on show list, which I probably should say. If I click on hide list, what's going to happen? It's going to get rid of the text in the card. So let's follow the code. So when I click on hide list button, we're going to call our toggle function. Our toggle function is going to set this.hide to true. Was this.hide true previously? When the component loads, hide is false, right? So hide is false when the component loads. Then I click on the button, which calls my toggle function, and so now it's going to change this.hide to true. So it's going to change from false to true. So when a hide is decorated with a state decorator, so what happens when hide changes?
It re-renders.
We're going to call the render function again, right? So we're going to call render, which is going to create our button. It's going to create our card content. It's going to call render list. So now it's going to say if this.hide. So what is this.hide now?
It's false. It's true.
Well, it's true now because we toggled it, right?
It's true.
So we're going to return nothing there. So it's going to be hidden. I go back and we do that. Goes back.
Nice.
The problem is I don't have any way to get back, but we can switch that. So how can I make it so that it's a toggle instead of just setting it to true?
So in your toggle function, just set it equal to the opposite of this dot I.
Yeah. Okay, so now it'll toggle, which that's kind of nice. But I mean, there's a couple things that are a little weird.
It says hide list the whole time.
Yeah. It says hide list the whole time and the card stays, right?
Yeah.
So how can we fix those things?
So you can, first of all, in the render list, you can just return the whole ion card.
Yeah.
And then
So one step at a time, right? So when you're developing, especially when it's early on, every time you make a change, you want to go look at it. Because if I had made some mistake somewhere in that and I kept going, now I'm in a land where it's like I made 15 changes and I have no idea what's happened so far. So I can't now I have to back way back, and I don't know how to get back 15 changes, but I do know how to get back one change, right? And the rule really is like if I can Command Z 4 or 5 times and I'm back into the good state, that's where I want to be. And you can wait about that long before you go and look. But until then, because I can get it back to what it was. And like at least it works again, right? But after I make just a few changes, I want to go take a look and make sure it actually looks the way that I expect it to. So yeah, so now the whole card goes away and comes back. You guys see why that is?
Yeah.
All right. So that's one piece of it. The next piece is this says hide list, right? We want to say show or hide list depending on what hide is. Okay. So let's just again for convenience, we'll just make another function. It says render button text. Okay. So what do we want to write in this function to determine the button text?
Same format as render list, except you're just going to return a string.
Yeah. So
So like you could I would first just copy the code and then flip it, or you could just write it all out. So if this dot hide return, if dot hide is show list, the string show lists, and then
otherwise
under that return hide list.
Yeah. So like Justin, how would you write this function? Like what should I write here?
So I do if this dot hide is true, then it's going to return show list.
As a string, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
It's just returning. You want it to just return what type of service is.
Yep.
And then otherwise return type list as a string.
Yeah, which is a little confusing because if this dot hide show,
yeah.
But it's because we're trying to show the opposite label of what it actually is, right? So then here, what do I need to put?
Render
that.
Yeah. Beautiful.
You really want to add an ion like ripple inside it.
Well, it's already doing it.
You want extra ripple.
Yeah, we want some extra ripple. Yeah, that's the nice thing about using frameworks, right? Like you get all this material design, the ripple button thing, animation, all that stuff. Right? All right. Now it is a little weird the way that the button is set up. Just that it's like pushing away from itself. At the minimum, I'd probably want it to look something more like this, probably. Like that. Oh, because once it's gone, then they don't push apart anymore. Okay. So another way to do this, like right now we are not inside. Ion content is usually what you put everything into when you're using the ionic framework. Ion content is like a scrollable div area. So you usually have an ion header and an ion content and then potentially an ion footer. So like we create even ion header. It's like ion title or something. Why is this white?
It's not interpolated.
Yeah, because it's not interpolated. Because we're inside of a nested element, so we have to use interpolation, which in a sense looks like that. Okay. Oh, that's closer. I forget. So, and if you don't know how to do these things, that the ionic docs are pretty good. They're not great. They're getting better.
Yeah, they're okay.
Yeah, they it's a So like this is version 4. So like their Ionic 1 docs are great, but it's very stable. Version 4 has only been around for like 6 months or so, so it's a little.
This may be a tangent of a question.
Mhm.
Why'd they build this? Like, where is their value? Like, in terms of like, because it's free to use. Like, where?
Oh, how do they make money?
Yeah. Like,
So they've largely just been funded, and they must get a crap ton of funding. Where they make their money now is there are enterprise level like deployment opportunities and configurations and native plugins that they've built that you can add into these things fairly easily. Usually, what you'll see with frameworks like this is that they're developed by big corporations. So like Microsoft does TypeScript, they take care of that, and they do it because 2 things. One, it's like brand awareness among developers, because Microsoft's TypeScript thing, so they can do better recruitment and some other things. But it's also because they use it internally, like it's theirs.
yeah. So they just give it to the world.
Yeah, so then they give it to the world. That builds standards so that it makes it easier for them to like acquire companies, and there's all kinds of benefits there. Ionic is not in the same boat. Driftico, I think, is the company that creates it.
The tech capital.
Don't they actually sell plugins too, like Ionic and stuff like that?
Yeah,
They have
that's
a bunch
one.
of apps, don't they? Like drag and drop prototyping,
Yeah,
things like that.
that's one of the things I said. And like now they have a desktop creator, but it's not particularly good. Like honestly, I don't know. They must have received a ton of funding though, because they've put lots of effort. They've been doing this for years.
Months and months.
Yeah.
Years into building this.
Yeah, without getting paid.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's really well done, and they have a big staff, and they do all kinds of stuff. They worked with Google a lot when they were doing the Angular stuff. They helped Angular develop some of the things it did. But, anyway, so if we go look for on header, we can just grab an example. So like once a toolbar and stuff. I usually just start with whatever the example is, and then remove things we don't care about. So we're not going to do the subheader. And it has a back button, which we're not going to need. So. Yeah, I was close. You just have to wrap it in there toolbar. There you go. Navigation bar. You can change that to say activity list. So now that it's like that, I actually might want to do this. Right. And you can actually, in the header, you can do some nice things. So you can do.
Before you flat spots, was it like actually sliding it up and down, or was it?
Yeah, because you're removing, because it's just whatever the HTML is at that moment in time, right? So you mean animating it?
Like, you like the
I think
bottom-
it was
that actually
I don't think it.
sliding
I don't think
down?
it animates. And we can try it.
Yeah, sometimes it's
Oh,
hard,
yeah, I see it.
like you get like artifact on
Well, it's that Gestalt stuff, right? So like you're auto completing the animation in your head because it does animate down. I think, yeah. But it could be animating up. It's really hard to tell. Because the hide, it could be animating
I
up.
think it is animated.
Because the hide, what Angular has probably done in their CSS is when this gets removed, instead of literally removing it, it applies a fade class and it just fades it up, which is just decreasing the size until it's gone, and then removes it from there. That's how Angular.
It's like brighten or something. The
The
shadow.
down is because the down is slower, so it's really hard to see.
Yeah, it applies a shadow too.
You get like a 240 hertz monitor.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, that's another nice thing about using a framework. You don't have to go figure out all that animation stuff. It just takes care of it. All right, so we can, though, if we want, add buttons up here. So we could do so basically we're just going to move this button up. And, we use an icon to show and hide. And we can use like an eyeball thing. Okay, should hide. Slot and nuts in. Yeah, there we go. Alright. So that still does our toggle, but we probably want to swap this. So Edwin, how do you think we would do that?
Can you? Well, you had the toggle on the show hide
Mm-hmm.
button. Can you just put the eye in that toggle
Mm-hmm.
function?
Yeah, so like we had the render button text that was switching back and forth before.
Right.
So let's start with that. So how do I modify this function so that I switch between the icon of eye off and the icon of eye?
It would be if this dot hide is true, then make it. Then you would want to show. Then you just want the eye
Yep.
icon.
Yep. So what do I put here? What do I need to replace this with?
Ion icon name
Yep.
equals eye,
Yep.
or whatever the name is of it.
Yeah, it's eye. Yep.
And then,
I always wrap these. Your safest bet, honestly, is to always wrap it in an array syntax. So that way later, if you want to add something as a sibling, you can. But and then this one's going to be what?
ion icon name equals string eye off.
Yep. And then what do I need to change down here?
So so the button. So then inside your button tags, you would just want the interpolated render button text
Yep.
function for this
Yep. In which case, we probably want to just name this like
render button. Is that working?
oh yeah, sorry.
Okay, cool.
Was there a reason, Sam, on line 25 you used a parenthesis and not a square bracket?
No, that's what I was saying. You can use either one.
Yeah.
But square brackets let you add siblings. So I can do this. The regular ones don't let you add siblings. See how it gets in there?
Yeah.
So your best bet is always to just use the square brackets. But if you only have a single thing at the highest level, you cannot use that. So I just wanted to show both examples.
Cool.
All right. So everybody gets. Everybody understands what's going on here, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
How do you make that bigger? That eye? The icon?
Good question.
So icons are actually just text or
Oh,
SVGs, depending on how it's set up. So you could,
font size.
yeah, so you could do it a couple ways. One, yeah, you can just change the font size, or you can, if you use it as an image, you can just change it with the width and height attributes. But you generally don't want to. Like, they do the right things with them, so you generally just want to follow whatever guidelines they have set up. As long as you have it appropriately, set up in your HTML, it should just work the way it's supposed to.
Okay. What about the color?
Color is easy for any ionic icon, any ionic things. Color is just a color attribute, and you generally want to change it to be, so it's primary, secondary, danger, or success are the ones that it starts with.
Tertiary.
And tertiary, you can add any that you want. You can add anything. You could add you could add exit color, and it would take it, and you could use it.
How would you set that up?
There's yeah, we can get into CSS stuff later. You can look in their variables section. They use shadow DOM stuff, which is really cool. We'll get into what that is and how that works in a future class. It is a really neat concept. But basically, there's global variables that you set for primary, secondary, etc. And so you can add as many of those as you want, and it uses the variables and creates all of them. So, but like I can do danger. So you can also, you can change it in the CSS. So if we go look at this will get into some of the shadow DOM stuff. So the button's transparent because it is. But see the shadow root thing that happens there? It shows you your style. Shadow root's cool because it isolates the CSS. So if you name things with the same classes or use the same variables or whatever, nothing at a higher level is going to affect it. So CSS generally cascading style sheets. It goes from the very top of the DOM down. So if there was something that said, this class means such and such, and you want your element to not follow that rule, which is useful in web components, right? We're building these little web components that can go on any website anywhere. So if I always want my eye to be orange when I go to another website, I want a way of not letting the person who's using my component change the color from orange to something else, because it's important that it stays orange. So what the shadow DOM does is it allows you to isolate everything, or you can expose certain variables. So like in this case, var ripple color. So ripple color is a variable, and you know that because of the dash dash. That's being exposed, so you can change the color of the thing. So you could change ripple color. To be
new levels.
So now you get a little bit different effect.
Is that kind of concept for the shadow DOM, is that that's why the file structure is your CSS is inside of the directory for that component?
Yeah, because the idea is that when you're building your components, you want them to have some CSS, but you want to ignore everything else that's going on the site, generally speaking. Now you may not. So in many cases, what we end up doing when we build is we remove the shadow DOM components. Mm-hmm. Because what we want to do is, in our case, we're building modularized pieces of our platform. So we build one thing to build content, we build another thing to do messaging, we build another thing for our settings and permissions. But in the end, we want them all to inherit from a higher level theme of the entire app project. So what we do is we don't do very much stylization at all. When we do, we don't use shadow DOM. You can get a similar effect by, let's see. Sort of the old school way of doing this. Old school, 6 months ago. Okay. So my component tag in this case is cmadmin cards categories. So when I write my CSS, I always put any CSS. I do CM admin card category space and then that thing. What that says is only apply this to Ion content that exists as a nested child of CM admin categories, which is, in my case, will always exist with this component because this component can only define things inside of it. Okay. So it's like an old school way of doing Shadow DOM stuff, but you don't have to do the variables and the API stuff or whatever. So anyway, just another way to do it. The way to turn Shadow DOM on and off is really simple. In your component, there's a shadow true, and you can remove it. Right, but anyway, so we have our little thing. It's doing these two things. The last thing that I want to show you guys is events and listeners, and help you to understand what those. Well, let's start with properties, and then we'll try to get to events and listeners. So, a property is a thing that you're defining on an HTML element that can be set by a higher level thing. It can be explicitly set, like it can be a string that's value or number, or it can be a variable that gets passed down. So in our app list, we could create a property
Text.
Yeah, so let's just create like one that's just like first item. We'll make it a string. Okay. And what we'll do then is we can call it here, we can say this dot first item with interpolation. And so whatever property gets passed down as first item into our element, we're just going to display that as our label. So if we go back up to our list, where we're calling app list, we can now add the property, which is as simple as explicitly what it is. Okay. That's it. And this is nice, so then like people who are using your code on other apps, if they wanted to use your app list, now they can just set a property of first item and they get that pretty little card and that stuff just happens, right? But we can also pass variables down. So let's say like, let's create a set of items.
Objects too?
Yep, everything. It goes through just like a variable normally everywhere. So the difference is now I'm not passing a string. I need to interpolate what the actual array is. So I do this dot items. Or, I mean, that's a public variable and there's reasons to do that, but I could just as easily have done. Let's see that. But we'll go with this approach because it'll give us some benefits later. All right, and now I would probably want to name the property something different. And that means I need to change it here. And now I'm expecting an array of strings, and that's how you say that, string, array of strings. So like this would be an array of numbers. That's just a type definition. What it helps with is in your IDE, in RubyMine, when I'm setting items to be something here, it's going to evaluate, is this item's an array of strings? And if it is, then we're good. If not, it'll put a red line under it. It's just to help you with things. Again, you can always just put any, or a lot of times you don't even have to put anything about this. It's just...
You do object array?
Yeah, object arrays would be any, but more likely your object array is an object of a certain kind.
Okay.
So like you could put first name string last name string. So that's an array of objects that have two attributes, one being first name, it's a string, one being last name, it's a string. Okay. So you're just defining what you're going to be sending back. But in our case, we have strings of items. And then so we're going to want to render the items. So how do we do that? We're going to need to put into this function here to actually show each of the items.
Wouldn't you want that outside?
Yeah,
You
you
can do
yeah,
like
yeah. I want it.
this inside out.
Yeah. So right, so that's our list. So now I want to loop over each of the items and put the HTML for that particular item.
So you're gonna do return items. How do you do this? That items
This.
dot map. And then
Why are we using map instead of for each?
because map returns the array with all the items inside.
Because we want to make a change to each of the items one at a time, and then return the list of all of the items having been changed. So return the map of item. So what do I want to return here? So actually, what do I want to return here?
The stuff you remove.
Damn.
Oh, you?
Absolutely.
Oh, sorry.
What do I want to return?
This or wait, so you're returning the which function?
So we're here, right? We have render, which is what we always call when we come in.
Mhm.
I'm gonna pass in a list of items, which I passed from up here. So it's just hello and goodbye. It's just an array of hello and goodbye. Then I come here and I'm going inside of my list and I say this.render items.
Mhm.
So then I go to line 9, and so now I'm just going to loop over items. So I'm just looping over the items one at a time. So item is each one. So it's hello and then goodbye. So what do I want to actually return here so that I can show the HTML for the item?
So you want to do like ion item.
Yep. So we can do the array syntax format like this, and then ion item, and then what?
And then interpolate item.
Yep. So we actually that would work fine. There's an ion label thing that just gives it a little bit different formatting. So I'm just gonna put that. That's it. Right. So now, refresh. Goodbye. Okay. So that's properties. So we're passing properties down. Okay. But we can't, if we modify items, there's a couple things. One, just modifying items doesn't do anything higher up. In fact, properties generally are not mutable. You can't change them. So you get an error if you try to change one of these things. So like if I called, here, if I just said this dot items equals that, it's probably going to give me an error. Huh, surprised by that. There's a function that you're supposed to use to make things mutable. Or not a function, but an option that you pass in. So if you want to make changes to it, you have to say mutable true. But
So if you put mutable false, would it throw an error then?
I don't know, because I think that's the default, and
Yeah,
so
it's
I'm not
just the
sure
default.
why it didn't. They're obviously working on their error stuff. Since it's so weird. Okay, but the issue right now is that
Well,
items.
you hadn't said it. That's your first time setting it. When you put it up there in render.
Well, it's being set though, because it's
Oh.
getting passed in
yeah,
from the
sure,
higher
I
level.
see. that's-
So here,
so
items is this item.
that's fine.
Yeah. So, but you're not supposed to be able to change it. It could be that because I did it literally in the render function. So like we could have a. Let's just say that when we click on this, we're going to call update. Okay, so let's just say we're going to call update when we change items. It just doesn't care. It used to, so I did upgrade this morning to like a newer version of things, so maybe it's going on. But. All right, so anyway, you're not supposed to be able to change it, and regardless, it's not changing in our app to-do list function. So items is still what it was. So even though I changed it to a blank array, which means that the list items aren't showing up because I'm rendering the list at the lower level, items isn't changing at the higher level. In fact, I could probably prove that. So like I'll leave up here, so we're still in the higher level function, right? I'm just going to create a div I'm going to say this dot items. That's just going to print out an object. So I'm going to do JSON dot stringify, so we can see this as a string in our code. And then do this update. Right, so we see hello, goodbye. So I removed it. So in the lower level component, the app list component, it's now an empty array, but in the higher level, it's still hello and goodbye. Okay. So sometimes I need to be able to send information up to the higher level component. So this often happens when, like in our example, we have each list item one at a time and we're editing and saving it, but I really don't want to send it up to the server as an individual item. I want to send the whole list.
Wait, even objects? Like whole, like person, first name, last name, whatever. You can edit it inside the thing and it won't affect.
It doesn't affect the higher level thing. Yeah.
So it copies it?
It copies it. Yeah, it makes a copy. Yep. So if you want to be able to send the information back up, we need some way of doing that. We need some way of omitting that, hey, some event happened. And sometimes it's even like there's not something that's even being passed down at all. So you just need some way of sending information that goes back up. So how do we send something back up? Well, we use events. So this gets us back to the event stuff that I was talking about before. So event. So and again, just like with state, I don't need you guys to understand how this happens. I just need you to know that it does happen. This is how you make the thing work. Okay. So event. Yeah, were you gonna say something, Justin? Or?
Sorry, John.
Okay. Okay, you understand. Okay. So update items. Let's just say, and it's an event emitter. And these are things you just have to memorize. You can go look at Stencil and see that you can do this, but it's just stuff you have to memorize. So event, by the way, RubyMine never recognizes it as a thing. You just have to copy and paste it up there, so it stops showing it. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to say this dot update items dot emit, and then we can send any data that we want to. So we can send first name Sam, and then maybe like new items what up. Right. We can say whatever we want, doesn't matter. You're just, when you call this update items emit, it's going to trigger an event in JavaScript, and then anything that's listening to it can do whatever it wants with what it gets back. It always goes up though. When you emit events, they don't go down the DOM; they only go up the DOM. Okay, and that's important because again, properties go down, right? Events go up. Okay. You can't emit an event down; it doesn't work. You can't send a property up; it doesn't work.
But that means you can also, I guess it makes sense. You can only talk to, if you were like, actually, yeah, never mind. It makes sense.
Yeah, so yeah, the communication flow though, right, is always properties down, events up. Okay. In fact, events by default only go up one. There's ways of telling it that it's allowed to bubble up farther. There's options, just like we did for the property mutable thing, but it generally only goes up one there.
So if level 1 you call the component, level 2 is that component, and you call the third component,
it might not make
level 2.
Yeah, it might not make it up to level 1. Yeah. All right. So if I then create a listener here and it's just the name of whatever you name the variable. It just does this for you in the background, figures it out. You can change the name if you want to as well. There's like an event name option or something. Yeah, event name. So you could call it like ASD or whatever. But generally speaking, you should be naming your variables what you want the event to be called because it just makes sense anyway. So then you're going to listen for update items. The import listen, stencil core again. And then you just decorate any function you want with that. So items. So now when I click on this, we end up in our items updated debugger. Okay, so it actually goes, put a debugger in here too, so you can watch the chain of events. All right, so when I click, I'm going to call update. Update's going to hit our debugger. After that, we're going to do update items.emit, which is going to emit this event up, which we're then listening to here, and it's going to pass us in an event that we can do something with. So click, click. We end up in our update function. We're going to emit that. We come here. We enter our items updated. We can do something with that. Now on event, it's the detail that has all of our information. Okay. So we have first name and new items. So now what we could do is we could set this items to be new items. Maybe it's detail, not details. What's that going to do?
I'm going to change items to Sam and new items.
Yep, but are we going to see that change happen? No, because it's not re-rendering. Why isn't it re-rendering? Yeah, there's no state. It's not decorated with the state decorator. So if we do this, though, okay. So yeah, I mean it's a different paradigm than what you were doing with the jQuery stuff, but it's much simpler. You can see. You just have to know really these four different functions, what these decorators do. So the prop, state, the listen, and the event. What do each one of those do? And then you can use that to communicate up and down all of your components. And the rest of it within each component is relatively simple. Right? Within each component, it's just take the data that I have and display or hide different sets of HTML. Make sense?
Yeah. And you create the DOM structure by putting an HTML tag of a component with I'm kind of losing what I'm saying, but it's like to put something lower for deeper into the DOM on this app to do list, you would just put an HTML tag.
Yep.
Within its render
Within
section.
Yeah, so renders where you're always starting, right?
And then that means that that's deeper in the DOM. That's like that. This is
So
the parent of that.
What makes it apparent is that, so here, ion card, you see it starts here and it ends here,
Yeah.
just like we do with like curly braces and stuff. It's the same. This is the beginning of the ion card. This is the end of the ion card, right? Inside of that is ion card content. So the child of ion card is ion card content.
Okay.
The child of ion card content, or the children of ion card content, is this div and this app list.
App list is a component.
App list is a component, but then you can go even deeper. So in app list, the child of app list is ion list. Child of ion list is ion item. Child of ion item is ion label. So we're going deeper and deeper in our nesting.
Right.
So if you want to send things down, what you're talking about is how they're getting nested. So if we go back to the app to-do list, what we're doing is sending from our app to-do list down to our app list items, because it's nested. So if you start at the render function, it's nested inside of its render.
Okay.
So it's literally about the DOM and what's going down. So if you're writing code inside of this app to-do list component, in order to send anything to any other components that you write in here, you have to send it to a property.
Through the items equals.
Yeah, so
brackets.
items equals brackets. So that's a property which we define on the lower level component with this prop
Right.
decorator. If you want to send anything up, so like here we don't make any reference to app to-do list. So we don't have any way of putting a property on an app to-do list, right? Because it doesn't make any sense because it's above us, not below us. So what you have to do here is emit an event back up the DOM. And the way you do that is by doing this event.emit.
Yeah.
But the parent has to be listening for that event.
Right.
If it's not listening to it, then it's not going to know about it. So it has this listen for whatever the name of your variable is, and it's decorating this function.
Yeah.
So it just gets passed in. You can name this function whatever you want. It's going to get passed in an event.
It's funny because sorry, go ahead.
You said properties can be, so prop can go down, right?
Properties only go down.
Okay, so like if you had set up like the add prop and made it mutable of the items array in to-do list,
Yep.
you could replace the items in app list.
You can change.
Order.
So if you make it mutable, you can change them inside of app list, but it won't affect what's in app list and the to-do list. Okay. So you can it only affects it within the scope that's called of the class that you're working in. It doesn't change it from where it came from.
Okay.
So like in Angular, there were ways with objects in particular that you could make changes in lower level components and would make changes to higher level components. And there's some possibility that that still happens here. I don't think that's true, but even if it is, in general, like you can always event emit back up. You don't have to have it on an object. So for simplicity's sake, let's just think about it as properties communicate down, events communicate up.
Right. Okay. And yet, in this case, we're passing like the same information with down to the property and back up.
Yeah, but we have to do something with it,
right?
So like we pass it down, and it's like here's what I had to start with, and then I make a change to it, and then I'm going to pass that back up, and I'm going to make a change to it at the higher level, and because it's on a state, it's going to re-render, and it's going to re-render a new instance of this lower level component. So now its property is changed to be what. So here, let's follow that flow. Yeah. So let's follow it all the way through. So we honestly have too many things going on there, just because we were doing the state show hide stuff and all that. Let's just get back to the basics. All right. So I have my app list, right? My items. So when I load the page initially, items is hello and goodbye. Right? Okay. So when we go look at our app list, when we get here, our copy of that is hello and goodbye. Right? I'm going to simplify this a little bit to just say that we're going to just emit back items. Which technically we're not even emitting back the items, we're just emitting back some other array of stuff. Okay. So I'm just going to emit back some other array of things. I am looking at the items property, right? So my items right now is hello and goodbye. So we're going to loop over it, we're going to see hello and goodbye. So higher levels, hello and goodbye. The copy that exists in our lower level component is also hello and goodbye. Now when I click, I'm going to call this update function. That's going to emit what's up as an array to our higher level function, which is listening here.
Yeah.
It then is going to change its items to event.detail. We can just do this now. That's what we're sending back. Because it's a state variable, at that point, this .items becomes what's up, an array of what's up. When we change a state variable, what happens?
The component renders.
The render function gets called again. So now we're going to render this function. So we're going to put our header, which is to do. We're going to put our ion content. We're going to put our card content. We're going to print out the stringified version of items, which is going to be an array of what's up. And then we're going to create a new instance of app list where the items are set to this.items, which are what?
What's up?
An array of what's up. So now, if we follow that back into here, items now are what? It's an array of what's up, right? So now when I loop over them, I'm going to be what's up. Right, so the reason why it's changing is because the property items is changing because the state variable items changed because the render function got called.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So we send it up, and then when we send it up, we re-render, and now the information that we're sending down is different.
Yeah.
It's based on what we sent up, but that's just a consequence of the actions that we took to get there.
Interesting.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the Angular is far more magic than this, and the way that it works, because you don't generally take this explicit of control of things. It does what's called two-way binding. So when you make changes, even at the lower level, to a variable that got passed down from a higher level, it just keeps itself in sync all the way around. So you don't have to write this code that does both directions. You just do the property piece. You don't have to worry about the event and the listener piece. But this is a much more explicit way of doing it, and you kind of see a little bit better what's actually happening. Okay. So we're always pushing information, and this is actually a good design architecture anyway. You always want to push information. You never want to pull information. So we're pushing information. We're saying, hey, child, this is what your items are. And then when you click on the child, it says, hey, parent, I know you wanted it to be that, but I think it should be this now. And then the parent says, you don't get to tell me what to do. I'll tell you what to do. It's this now, which is the same, which is what you sent it, right? But that's because of what we're explaining.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
So this feels like a really stupid question.
Mm-hmm.
We on the child, we changed the element, and then we sent the information back up, only to send it back down. There was no way to just like stick
There
it
was a way,
to
but-
keep it in the child.
Oh, we could have, yeah.
You could have made the items in the list a state variable, and once you change it, you could have changed it there. But this works if you're assuming you have many children, and one of your children said, I
Okay.
changed. And you want to change everybody.
Yeah.
Oh,
So this is,
okay.
right
yeah.
now we're changing an entire list. Really, normally it's this item's one thing, this item's one thing, this item's one thing. And so what I'm trying to do is tell the higher level list, I modified this version of you so I can save the entire list together.
Okay.
But yeah, we can totally do it at the lower level. So here, and we can prove that and see that like the things don't change at the higher level. Let's,
We don't have to.
no, we can do it. So like, let's not, instead of emitting an event here, we can just change okay. Now what's going to happen here is that we're going to change items in our lower level component, but because we didn't tell the higher level component about it, remember that stringified version there?
Yeah.
That's not going to change, but our list is going to change.
Okay.
So see, which is nice because it's modularized. So you can make changes just within your component. A lot of times you are just making changes within your component. But sometimes you want to be able to communicate up to the higher level.
Makes sense.
Because like now I'm out of sync, kind of, right? Even just that.
If there's multiple child components, not all of them would know
Right.
that the one of the child components changed.
Right.
They were all referencing the list.
Right. So like if you're doing something like we do in our to-do list, like instead of doing app list, we could have made this an item. And now we're probably just passing a single item down, right? we don't need to do this map. And probably move this map to the higher level stuff. Alright, so we changed it from a list to an item. We're just expecting to get one item for this. We go back up to our to-do list. We do the loop potentially here. So now I just changed a whole bunch of stuff. We'll walk back through that in a second. Always remember to write the word return. Otherwise, you'll sometimes see like, why isn't this showing up? I'm totally calling that. It's treating it as a void function, so it doesn't actually show up. All right. So now we're doing the same thing. It looks the same. Hello and goodbye. But each one of these is a new component. Right, so there's two app items being created, one for each of these. One for hello, one for goodbye. And to prove that, I can come in here in our rendered section and I can do console.log this.item, and we'll see that they show up on different lines. We can also go look in the HTML and see that there's actually two of those components. So there's yeah. So there's, it's because of all this video stuff going on. There's two app items. See that?
Yeah.
Okay, one for each of them. So now, if I make a change to one of them, so when I click on this one, just choose a random number so it can actually look different. When I click on that one, I get this number. When I click on this one, I get that number. But our overall array hasn't changed, right? Sometimes I want it to, because let's say, for example, I want to add a new one in. I need to be able to add it onto this array so that I can continue looping over it. There's no good way for me to just add a new item without doing that. But if I do it and I add it onto the array, remember the array is still hello, goodbye. So when I add the new one, it's going to render, and these two changes that I made are gone. Okay? It'll put them back to hello and goodbye, because it's going to re-render at a higher level thing. So what I want is my source of truth to be at the higher level, so that I have one consistent array of information. And so in order to do that, I want to send this information when I make a change to an individual item up to make the change to the source of truth, which is the higher level.
Sounds like good practice.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, you don't have to. There are other ways you could try to figure out, but that's the standard way of doing something like this. So that's why you might want to do this. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Good. Like we can keep changing, which is kind of cool. Yeah. So every time you click on it, we're changing the value. So what we could then do, though, is what we were doing before. This is where we started the class. Is started doing that. We can do old item, this dot item, new item is some random string. Okay. So when I click the update button, it doesn't actually do anything. It just calls this function, right? What it's going to do is it's going to emit old item is this item, which is the original one, the copy that we got. And then it's going to say, and the new item is this thing. So we can also, just to make our lives a little bit easier, there's another way to do this. We could also just pass the new value up. We just need to pass down an index. So where is this in the array? Which is just a little bit easier to do here because we can get the index right here. Okay, so like the first one's going to be 0, the second one's going to be 1, etc. So then when I'm here, I have this index, and I can just pass up index, this dot index value is this random thing. So basically what I'm saying is I want to change this item in the array that has this index to be this. If I come back, when I get the event back, I can say this item's. So we do have to make a copy because we have to because the signature is not going to change. We're just changing an item inside of it. So copy. And then we'll say the copies index we're going to change the copies. The value of the copy at that index to be the value, and then we'll change items to be a copy of copy. And then item is going to change, and item is a state variable, and so it'll re-render the entire thing. So now both of them will stay in sync. Because it changed. Item. They could just be. Now they actually stay in sync. So now if you wanted to add something, you could, and the source of truth is right already, so you just add it into that array and it'll just show up in the output. Makes sense?
Nice. Yeah.
So let me.
I'm gonna have to watch the video.
Yeah.
See what I did next.
Yeah, so I made a whole bunch of changes because I'm trying to make a point in a 2% battery, but that's why we want to do that.
Yeah.
The schedule is my cycle for the day starts at when this happens, and then in the afternoon I watch the video, and then in the morning I try to do new stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mine includes all of that plus like staying until midnight or 1 a.m.
Trying to figure out what's going on with all this stuff. Yeah. So I did push that. You'll see it's a branch on GitLab now. You guys been doing GitLab command stuff with Brendan and those guys?
No.
Oh, okay.
But we know
Other
that.
than fixing stuff that's broken.
But we know that.
Okay.
Well,
Yeah, I can do some review on that.
I've been getting by. Hey,
It's up to you.
How much of this? A lot.
The whole thing. We just finished, buddy.
It's,
Doing stencil. Spent a lot of time on properties, events, listeners, and state, and what those things mean. Yep. But if you look at the branches, there's an events branch now. I'll add it as a merge request, so it'll be a little bit easier to see.
okay.
And then you can just go into changes and like look at the.
Nice.
Gene
Hey,
also
Sam, do
done.
you ever do like your group?
Peripheral vision.
What's that? What'd you say, Tony?
I ever do that group?
You're
Yeah,
on
I
this.
never do that group.
You're on this group, aren't you?
If I got an invite, I didn't accept it and it probably expired.